a series of Townhall Meetings, and we call this our Tri-County Forums. And I couldn't be happier tonight to say that we actually have all 3 counties, Franklin, Delaware, and Union counties represented. And I would imagine what you'll find tonight, there's representatives from each of those counties in the audience. We've got a mixed crowd, I'm sure. We've got Democrats, we've got Republicans, we've got taxpayers, we've got parents, we've got teachers, we've got everyone across the spectrum. So I anticipate we'll have a lot of good questions and a lot of good information to share tonight. The main thing I want to say, I'm going to let these folks take some time and tell you about themselves. But what I want to get across is how much I appreciate them taking time out of their schedule. They're already on school boards in these counties, and they're coming out tonight to share their experiences with you. And I thank them personally very much for making this opportunity available to the people who follow the Dublin Republican Club and folks who are concerned citizens, concerned parents, concerned taxpayers. So without further ado, the first thing I'd like to do is introduce our moderator for the evening. Matt Mayer has been an integral part of the Tri-County Forums. He's also past president of the Buckeye Institute. He's the president of Opportunity Ohio, and he's also recently authored a book that I hope you will all have a chance to read. It's Taxpayers Don't Stand a Chance, and what he's got in the book is also answers on what to do about it. I'm sure he'll have an opportunity to speak on that. I know he brought some copies, so let's see what he has to say. The school board members who are with us tonight, we've got Doug Lasker from Marysville, we've got Mark Scher from Worthington, we've got Rod Baster from Buckeye Valley, and we have Paul Lambert from Hilliard. Unfortunately, we were not able to secure a representative from the city of Dublin, but hopefully these folks will be able to shed some light on what goes on in the school board and the pursuit of, you know, obviously, what I'm confident about is everybody here tonight, they want quality schools, they want what's best for the kids, they want a strong community, they know how it impacts property values, and so I think we all appreciate the need and the demand and the costs involved. So what we're going to do tonight is explore some of the opportunities, the challenges, things that have worked, things that haven't worked, and with that, I'll leave it to you. Thanks, Matt.
Why don't you guys go ahead and grab your spots? I want to one last hope. Is there really no one from Dublin here? Okay. No one? Bueller? Well, just let me thank you, the Dublin Republican Club, for hosting this really important event from my perspective. I want to thank those of you who are taking your time to come out on a busy evening. I know it's fall. We all have a million things going on, and so it's really important and valuable that you took your time to come out here tonight. Especially those of you who've made, I think, the majority or all of these forums that we've been doing over the last 6 months. I really want to thank the panelists who came out. You know, they don't need to do this. They've got lots going on, and these are some of the brightest minds that are actually in the trenches making the tough decisions. And some of the decisions, I know we disagree on some of the things that they've done, but they're doing it, and they're here to be accountable. As Bill mentioned, there are copies of the book back on the back table. They're free. A National Foundation has underwritten me to hand them out all over Ohio, so I'm doing that. So feel free to take a copy. If you don't like it, use it for target practice or put it under your parrot's cage. If you do like it, pay it forward. Go on Amazon, buy a copy, and give it to somebody who you think might want to read it. And 100% of all proceeds are being donated to C3 organizations, the Reagan Library out in Simi Valley, as well as the State Think Tank Network across the country here. Let me set the table briefly with a few opening remarks. And first, I want to address a little more specifically the absence of any school board members or administrators from Dublin City Schools. You know, through multiple channels, we tried repeatedly to get them to come to this event tonight. And they spurned us at every opportunity, and in fact, one board member told someone here that the reason they wouldn't come was because I was moderating. Now, I understand I'm a scary guy, and I'm never going to win the Prom King award anywhere. But I'm a Dublin resident, and I'm a Dublin taxpayer, and my kids are in the school system, like most of you. And I find it highly problematic that our elected officials and our school leaders don't show the respect to you and to me to come here and explain why they're doing what they're doing and take questions from you guys at this event. I think it's childish, I think it's disrespectful, and I think it's conduct unbecoming the positions that they hold. Bill would never be that blunt, but I will. And I really think, and I hope you hold them accountable for not showing up tonight. Next, I want to address the use of the word facts in school district levy campaigns. And I think this is important. You know, we are told by proponents of levies to get the facts. The problem is that the facts that they want you to get tend not to be facts at all. And let me explain that. For several weeks now on the front page of the Dublin Villager, I'm sure you've read it, I've read it, we've been told that the cuts will occur, what cuts will occur if the levy doesn't pass. Larger class sizes, fewer AP courses, pay-to-play sports, no busing, cuts to art, music, and other programs. These cuts are promoted as facts, as these are inevitable things that will occur should we defeat the levy. That's just simply not true. If you look at the one-pager that you received on Dublin City Schools, and everybody should have those figures are actual facts. They don't change, they're not a choice. They are there. You can check them all on a website, whether it's the U.S. Census Bureau, whether it's the Department of Education. Those are facts. It is a fact that school funding from taxes has increased at a rate more than 3 times greater than inflation. It is a fact that the median household income in Dublin barely beat inflation, as teacher pay jumped by nearly 47% over the last decade. It is a fact that despite these cuts we've heard about that have already occurred, spending goes up every year from 2009 through 2016, averaging 4.8% growth, spending growth, which is twice or 2 times as much as inflation, from 2012 to 2016. And most importantly, it is a fact that if Dublin City Schools refuses to tackle compensation package costs, which swallow 90% of all spending, by adjusting compensation packages and the growth trend of those packages, then it is a fact that taxes will have to keep going up, and or everything in the remaining 10% of the budget is subject to being cut. That is a fact. And let me give you an example of where this plays out. The average teacher salary in Dublin is about $69,761, according to the Department of Education. That translates into about $63 million a year for just pay. That doesn't include the benefits, it's just pay. If teacher pay over the last decade had kept pace at inflation rather than almost twice inflation, it would be about a $53.5 million hit. If you do the math, that means that's about $9.4 million a year less spending over the last decade. Now, we've gotten higher, that's this following year, but you get the math on that. That was just inflation. If they just kept pace with inflation, like, by the way, the median household income kept pace with inflation in Dublin. So that's not some outrageously low expectation, okay? So it gives you the size of the problem if you're dealing with 90% of the budget in its compensation packages. If you fail to tackle those and restrain those, taxes are an inevitable outcome of that every 2, 3, 4 years in terms of levy campaigns. It's that simple. There's a thing I talk about in the book called ginos. Some of you have heard this before. It's journalists in name only. I think journalists have an obligation to provide their readers with both sides of the story. For too long now in Dublin, we've not gotten both sides of the story. Dublin residents, year after year, are given story after story entirely devoid of both sides of the story. Every week on the front page hits us with the emotional blackmail cuts that will occur should we defeat the levy. But not once do we see an opponent cited, a tough question asked of the school district and answered, or actual facts as the ones listed in that one-pager that you're looking at, and the charts provided to you tonight on the curvature and all those types of things from spending. I hope this practice of merely reporting what the school district says ends, and the good old-fashioned, hard-hitting investigative reporting comes back to our front pages. Because it is impossible for you to make informed decisions if you never hear the entire picture, if you get one half of that picture. For example, you never read during the last levy who funded that campaign. 72% of all funding for the Good Schools Committee came from vendors to the school district that received It's not widespread, grassroots support by taxpayers. It's being funded by people who have a financial interest in the outcome. But you never saw that in a newspaper. I hope this time around, the Dublin Villager will report that fact. And then finally, a word on intellectual emptiness. The fundamental question that we all have to answer is this. At a time when income barely keeps up with inflation and our homes have lost value, do we provide enough funds to our school district to get an excellent or expect an excellent education? We may answer that question differently. You may say yes, I may say no, vice versa. But answering that question with a yes does not make someone anti-teacher or anti-kid or anti-public schools. Throwing those slurs at levy opponents is simply intellectual laziness. Saying enough is enough simply means that whoever says that believes that our leaders need to make tougher choices with the generous funds we've already given them. And again, you may disagree with that. And you're okay to disagree with that, but you don't need to charge opponents by saying there's another anti-teacher or anti-kid, or they don't support their kids, or they don't support the system. We all want our kids to get great education. That's why we live here. And that's what we want in our system. So the question is, how much is enough? With those remarks, we're going to let each speaker go down from this side to that, 10 minutes each, and then I'll come back up and we'll open it up for all questions. So I'd rather we spend the bulk of our time with Q&A from you guys, who probably have lots of great questions, and make these guys give you some good answers, hopefully. So, Mark, with that.
Wow, that is a tough act to follow. I'm going to start with two unscripted notes. First, I think that Worthington teachers would be thrilled to have got the inflation rate as far as salary increases, at least the last couple of years and moving forward. And second, the Worthington people in the room will positively attest to the fact that the reporter for the Worthington News that covers Worthington schools is not a giant. You should read her reporting sometime. So good evening.
Good evening. Good evening.
It is a genuine honor to be speaking at the Dublin Republican Club. I've been attending these meetings for years, and if there's one thing you can say about Bill Jacob and company, they are a class act. Year after year, Bill is Bill and his motley group put together amazing forums, amazing speakers, the best in Franklin County, and it's a real treat to be able to speak at this one. I've been asked to provide a perspective on the topic of school funding. I'm going to do that. Start by telling you a little bit about myself. Apart from being a Bill Jacob fan, I am a software developer by trade, and I've been a member of the Worthington City Schools Board of Education for almost 7 years, including 1 year as its president. The topic is school funding, but I don't think you're really all that interested in that. We can talk about state share and local share and mills and guarantees and tangible personal property taxes and federal stimulus and really get down in the weeds. But the reality is that a district, no matter how it gets there, has to have sufficient revenue to fund the programs that they locally want to be able to fund, that they want to be able to offer. And the amount of that requirement is going to be determined by the other side of the ledger. How much do these things cost, meaning school district expenses? So that's what I'm going to talk about for the bulk of my time. The other thing I'm going to talk about is how you can hold your school district accountable, see what's going on. And in fact, I think I'll start there. So rule number 1. This is an abbreviated version of the 10 rules that I have to do with this. But, rule number 1. Your second most important tool for holding the district financially accountable is the district's 5-year forecast. You know, it's a truism that there are no secrets in public education. If you know where to look, if you know what questions to ask, your school district will be more than happy, or in some cases less than happy, to provide you with the information. But the place to start is the district's 5-year forecast. It has actual revenue and expense numbers for the past couple of years and projections for the current year and the next 4 years to follow. That's why it's called a 5-year forecast. So if your district does have a negative balance in any of the years of the forecast, they have to, by statute, take steps to balance it. And there are only a handful of ways to do that, right? You can raise taxes, you can hope that the state is going to give you more money, you can hope that President Obama does another stimulus, I wouldn't hold my breath on that one. Or they can raise the money locally. Of course, there's always the forgotten choice. They can start cutting stuff, but more on that later. The ODU website has a document called How to Read a 5-Year Forecast. It's an excellent document. It's a good primer on the subject of 5-year forecast, so if you haven't seen it by now, you should get a copy and look it over. Now, rule number 2 is your most important tool for holding your school district accountable is not the forecast itself, but far more interesting are the notes to the 5-year forecast. The numbers in the forecast can tell an interesting story, but obviously their accuracy is only going to be as good as the assumptions upon which they are derived. So everything depends on those assumptions. And there are going to be revenue assumptions, and those are going to have data points such as total district valuation, the sum total of all property in the district. You need to know this number to understand how much money 1 mil raises. School district treasurers don't just pick a number out of the hat when they run on a levy campaign. There's a bit of science to it, and the more you understand about the science, the more you can validate for yourself whether the levy request is going to be reasonable. So you need to know valuation, you need to know if your district is lucky enough to still be receiving tangible personal property tax reimbursements, how much is that going to be? How much can you reasonably expect to get from the state and federal government? Do the assumptions make sense given the legislative climate? For example, in Ohio, it doesn't make sense if you see an assumption that says that the state's going to give you 20% more money next year than they gave you this year. That's probably not going to happen because of the legislative climate. In fact, the state of Ohio just doesn't have the money to do that. As important as the revenue assumptions are, we also have to take a close look at the other side of the ledger, the expense numbers. And you do have to start with salaries and benefits because they dwarf every other district expense. So look at your assumptions for those. Starting with salaries, benefits, how much the step increases cost each year. These should all be documented in the forecast. In the forecast assumptions, there should be some line that says step increases cost on average, how much per year. What are the staffing projections in the forecast? You can't look at these things in a vacuum. If a school district, and I'll use Olin as an example, is growing like a weed, and they're getting many hundreds of students in addition every year, that should be reflected in the forecast, and that should be reflected probably in the salary and benefit total cost of the district. That should go up. That only makes sense. If, on the other hand, your district is declining, or Worthington had declining enrollment for the longest time, it's only uptick now, the decline in enrollment should be reflected in the forecast as well. Another thing to look at, particularly now, is how many annual retirements are forecasted. Every time a teacher retires, school district is going to save, depending on the district, anywhere from $20,000 to $40,000. So if you're anticipating a large number of retirements, those retirements should be factored into the forecast. And all of this is going to play into the mathematical calculation by which a school district treasurer can come up with a levy amount. You have to look at things like the annual rate of growth for healthcare. Now, if your district's healthcare is increasing by 25% a year, and yet you see that the average for, say, private sector healthcare increases are going up by 3 or 4% a year, then you have the right to ask a question. Something is out of whack. Moving on to rule number 3. Labor costs are the biggest expense, but not the only expense. And here, levy watchdogs tend to make big hay out of the percentage of budgets that go to salaries and benefits. But as a practitioner of this, I'll tell you, it's a totally artificial number. It is. I can make that number be anything that I need for it to be, depending on who I'm talking to. But I'll tell you how to do it. In Worthington, anyway, we're privileged enough to have bond funds by which we can pay a lot of expenses, not salaries, not benefits, but a lot of expenses. So hypothetically speaking, let's say I need a new roof on a building. Well, if I pay for the roof out of the bond fund instead of the general fund, then the percentage of the general fund that goes into salaries and benefits is going to artificially be increased. If, on the other hand, I decide to pay for my roof from the general fund, that number is going to be decreased. The moral of that particular story is not to get hung up on that number. It is an irrelevant number. Okay, so a couple of takeaways since my time is joining us. Key takeaway number 1. If you wait for the levy campaign to start looking at this stuff, you wait too And there are a couple of corollaries to that. All levies pass eventually, and no levies forever is not a realistic plan for most districts. And I don't have the time to tell you why that's true, but if somebody asks a question, I'll be glad to go into it. But, you know, it is a factor. By the time a levy gets on the ballot, anyone with an interest in analyzing the necessity has waited too long. The requirement for the levy should have been tipped off years in advance for people paying attention by looking at the 5-year forecast. Worthington Schools is on the ballot in 2012. We've been telling people we are going to be on the ballot since 2009. And we're telling people today that we're going to be on the ballot again in 2015. We have a planned levy cycle. It's because schools don't get inflationary increases. I'm proud to say that our expenses are coming along at a little bit above the current projected inflation rate. Last I checked, it was about 2.9%, which, you know, as the saying goes, is not bad for government work. So, key takeaway number one, I can't put it strongly enough. The levy campaign is the worst possible time to start analyzing district spending practices. If you're going to engage in this analysis, do it during a low heat period. Key takeaway number two, a 5-year forecast is a tax and a levy plan. If the forecast is properly prepared, you should be able to look at the forecast, analyze the assumptions for yourself, and draw conclusions as to whether additional tax revenue is going to be required during the period forecasted. In particular, you have to check out the assumptions for things like salaries and benefit increases. Are these reasonable given the time? And so forth. Different districts approach forecasting differently. Does the forecast assume things like step increases? I've looked at some forecasts that have entirely unrealistic forecasts, 0% step increases, for example. So you need to analyze these things. Key takeaway number three, and this is generically true. School boards have a lot less power than people think that they do. Even if I wanted to, and I do, I can pay teachers the way that I want to pay teachers. If Mark was the ruler of Ohio, what Mark would do is allow market forces to prevail in the education sector. Note that this might not save money, but I think we'd get a better product. What I would do is pay teachers as much as I had to in order to attract the quality that I want. For positions where there are a lot of applicants, I can go lower. For positions where there are not as many applicants, I would want to go higher. The reason I can't do that is not that I'm a bad negotiator, it's because Ohio Revised Code 3317-14 says that school districts have to adopt a teacher salary schedule with provisions for increments based on training and years of service. But I'll let you in on one secret, and again, if somebody asks a question about this, I'll go into it. Some of that changed with House Bill 153 last year, so if your district is a race to the top district, House Bill 153 is now saying that I can adopt a salary schedule based on performance. Key takeaway number four, I wanted to spend some time addressing the elephant in the room, and that's the collective bargaining process. And I'm over rats. Well, if somebody wants to know about the collective bargaining process, I will cover that. I will pass it down to you. Thank you.
Thanks. I just probably make up some time here. I like on the pages and bullets. But, I'm from Marysville. I want to thank you guys for having me here. I'm just going to put on the table what I feel is, I think needs to change if you want to change the way things go on these days. And I think it is, we need to change the way boards, governance teams think and act. And I think however you get there, I think it might be more specific to your individual district. But so that's my premise, and I'm just going to go ahead and tell you my story a little bit. I ran a political action committee back in 2006 in Marysville to basically do what Mark says you shouldn't do, is show up when there's a levy on the ballot. And that's exactly what happened. They failed the levy 3 times. We managed to get the levy to fail 3 or 4 times, and then they finally, rallied the troops and circled the wagons. And at that point, our group even said, you know what, we're staying out of this one. It was just, the entire community was, they were threatening sports, they were threatening busing. It was just, there was no way we were going to win that battle. So at that point, we set our sights on getting a couple board members elected to the school board. Because we believe the only way to really change things is to change leadership. In 2009, myself and one other person, or actually two other people from my group that ran, put 3 open spots, and 2 of us got elected. So there were 9 people in that race. We have 2, we're at a losing end of a 3-2 board right now. So that was in 2009. At that point in time, the forecast had us back on the ballot, I believe in 2010, maybe in 2011. And our current expenditures were $46 million, and we're projected to increase our expenditures to $54 million for the next 3 years. Where we sit today, I'm not taking any credit for this, so I'm just going to tell you where we sit today, and then I'll explain to you what I think has helped us get there. Our budget is currently at $46 million. It hasn't gone up since 2009. It's $8 million less than what was projected. We have stayed off the ballot, but we're back on the ballot in November this year. Salaries were frozen, including steps, for the last 2 years. We've eliminated 23 positions through some and additional ones through attrition. We have a new superintendent in Marysville that's starting to look at some of the things that we had asked to be looked at when we first got on board. We were told didn't need to be looked at. There are times we would ask questions and we were told that we were out of line, we were micromanaging. This new superintendent's to start to look at those things. She's bringing in third-party audits to look at some of those areas. So, and Levy, pass or fail, she's committed to doing those things. The board has pulled the steps out of the forecast and written in a line item in our forecast saying a 2% salary increase or step. So that's the increase that's built into our current forecast, which the progress that's made there is, in the past, that would be called a freeze. They wouldn't even talk about the 2% steps that occur every year. They would consider that a freeze in the past, whereas today, that's the only salary increase that's in the forecast that we talk about is that 2%. There are no steps. It may end up being a step, but we're talking about that front and center now. Board has communicated publicly that we want to get away from the single salary schedule. We have a compensation committee that the union president sits on, and our board president has told her straight out that the board is committed to moving towards performance pay and getting away from the single salary schedule. So I think those are some good progress that has occurred over those years. Again, I don't take credit for, in fact, I voted against some of the things that got us there, so I'm not taking credit for any of this. But what I think that got us there is we changed the conversation. We started talking about compensation at every board meeting. We started challenging some of the assumptions in the forecast, and I think that kind of pressure had changed the direction of our district. The other board member is very into policy and law, and so she's been very pointed about things that aren't consistent with policy, so that helped with some accountability. And so I just think, I guess getting back to, what I think needs to happen is we need to find ways of changing the way boards think and act.
Thanks. My name is Paul Labert. I think I'm going to dovetail right into what Doug has said so far. Just to let you know about me, I'm a first-term member of the Hilliard School Board, and you guys probably know that the I-270 suburbs are all these hodgepodges of municipalities and school boards, and so part of the Hilliard School District includes the city, sections of the city of Dublin, Columbus, Hilliard, 5 townships, and so it's a hodgepodge. And if anybody wants to know, ask me a question about how city governments interfere with school districts.
Mom, can you speak up a little bit?
Yeah, let me hold it a little bit closer. Does that work better?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Again, I'm a first-term member of the board, but I've been involved in local governance in the Hilliard community for quite a while, starting with land use planning, which is connecting me directly to the economics of school funding in our community. From that perspective, I've been writing a blog for about 6 years. It has over 400 hosts in it. I encourage you to visit. I invite you to visit. It's called Save Hilliard Schools. Easy to find on Google if you want to go there. I had the great fortune of spending my career as CompuServe, starting with the company when we had about 50 employees back in the early 70s. Retired in 2000 as the Chief Technology and VP of Global Network Operations for our network division. So I had a chance to actually operate and lead a business unit that's about the same size as our school district, which has been very helpful as we look at, I'm not scared of the large numbers, I guess I should say. I'm going to take a little tack, different tack than the other guys did. I believe that to understand public school economics in Ohio, a good place to start is recognizing that there are 4 primary kinds of school districts in the state. The first kind are the urban districts like Columbus. Second are the agricultural districts, and I'll talk a little bit about for sales in our county. There are the Appalachian districts. In this case, we're going to talk about New Boston down in Scioto County. And then the suburban districts like Dublin and New Haven and Marysville and many of the school districts that are around the I-270 ring. By the way, for anybody that cringed when I said Appalachian, that is the correct pronunciation for it. And I claim that because my 7th great grandfather settled Ohio 200 years ago on land granted for his service as a naval officer in the Revolutionary War. And so it is Appalachian. And I'm proud to be Appalachian. So why are these distinctions important? It's because state school funding in Ohio is primarily based on property values, particularly the sum of assessed values on all properties in the school district divided by the number of students served. The amount of state funding the school district will receive is inversely proportional to the assessed value, property values per student. By the way, if you're sitting probably in the first third of the room, there's a set of charts on your chair. If you don't have one of these charts, it's because you sat too far back in the room. But these will give you some of the detailed numbers if you want to follow along. Okay, so the first kind of district is the urban district, again like Columbus. They have moderate assessed values per student, and that's driven by the commercial industrial property component within those districts. But they also have very high levels of poverty, which also influences funding. You can see these numbers in the lower left-hand chart. Urban districts receive a moderate amount of state support, about 60% of the state income taxes paid by the residents of Columbus, in this case, comes back to them in state support. They have a low performance index, you might notice, in spite of having one of the highest per student spending numbers in the county, which is in the lower right-hand chart. That's because performance, in this case, performance measured by the performance index on the state report cards. That's because performance is related much more to poverty than it is to spending on the kids. Agricultural districts have low property values with moderate incomes. The low assessed property value is a consequence of CAUV, the Constant Agricultural Use Valuation Policy, which is a farm subsidy program funded through the school funding system, meaning that school funding that would have otherwise been provided by local property taxes on farmland is instead provided by increased state subsidy, which we all pay. In this case, this isn't for sale. State funding is about 125% of state income taxes paid by the residents. But in fairness, we should also recognize that the agricultural districts tend to have high performance scores and much lower student spending, and that's typically because they just have fewer referrals in the agricultural districts. The Appalachian districts are kind of in the lose-lose scenario. They have low property values and very low incomes. They have poverty like the urban districts with no commercial or industrial tax base to help fund them locally. The spending is low, about half that of an urban district, and so is the performance index. And again, remember this because of poverty, not the spending. State funding is multiples of the state income tax by the residents, and this is that huge green bar in the upper right-hand chart, where in the case of New Boston down near Portsmouth, the amount of state funding they get is 6 times the amount of income taxes paid by the residents there. And then the last kind is the suburban district, Dublin, Hilliard, Worthington, and so on. Suburban districts have very high property values. I won't say very high. They have high property values, high incomes, high comparable spending, and generally high performance index scores, with very little state funding. Dublin, in this case, is among the lowest in terms of state funding, getting back only 12 cents of every dollar that's paid in state income taxes. Suburban districts are the cash cows that subsidize all the other kinds of districts. And so the political reality, and you could ask this of the state representative in the room, the political reality is that it's 3 against 1 for our representatives in the state legislature. Putting the suburban districts last in line for new money and first in line for state funding cuts and new taxes. The consequence is that suburban districts are increasingly on their own for funding. And thinking of Dublin, I'm reminded, you may remember that in Gordon Gee's first term as president of Ohio State University, he threatened the governor when I don't even remember who the governor was at the time, but as he was threatening deep cuts to Ohio State's funding, he said, why don't you just stop funding us all together and we'll take university private. And I've had that conversation with folks in Dublin before and saying, when we just go up to 12% and make a private school system, then you don't have to deal with all the other stuff. I encourage folks in the suburban school districts to pay attention to the decisions made by your school board and your city council and quit worrying about so much what goes on in the state house because we're outrun there anyway. It does matter who you elect to the school board and to the city council and to the mayor's spots. Your local school board will determine what programs and services are offered in your school district and how many teachers, staff, and administrators you employ to provide those programs and services and what they will get paid. This will determine 90% of your school district budget and be the primary driver of property tax increases. Again, it matters who you elect to your school board. You should pay at least as much attention to the school board elections as you do to levy issues, because it is the school board that controls the spending that leads to the levies. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Rod Baster. I'm a member of the Buckeye Valley Local School Board. And these 3 gentlemen have done such a great job of a lot of facts and figures. I'm taking a little different approach here. I really just want to share with you my take on being a school board member and really why I got to this point. I've served on a school board now for 7 years, and I served 2 years as the board president. And I've been a resident of the Buckeye Valley area for 25 years, and I put 4 children through the school district, and was very involved from an athletic booster perspective and volunteering, and my wife volunteered tremendously in all the levels of the schools. And basically, I got to the point where I was kind of frustrated with some of the things that were going on in the school district, and attended the meetings and listened, and felt like, okay, maybe I can run for this and see if I can, make a change, or at least contribute in some way as a board member and better understand what goes on as a school board member and what goes on in education. So before I actually ran for the board, I got on the finance committee. And one of the things that I think so many of us have really no clue or understanding about schools is the financial piece of it. It's very complicated, it's very hard to understand, and I, for one, had no clue what it was about until I got on the finance committee, and really through the teachings of our treasurer, we began to understand what it was about. And ran for the school board, and like I said, I'm in my 7th year, and every day, every meeting, I learned things. And I guess one of the things as a school board member, we have to be very open to new ideas and open to input from the communities, and go out there and really listen and work with our communities. Buckeye Valley is somewhat unique. It's we only have roughly 2,300 students in our school district, but we cover 200 some square miles, and we're in 4 counties. So it's a big challenge to get out there and talk to all of our residents. It's not as easy as just going up and down the sidewalks and knocking on doors. You're driving to a house and then driving another mile to another house and maybe 2 or 3 miles to the next one. And so it's tough to get out there and communicate, but we do our best to gather information from them. So it's the biggest challenges, I guess, I see as a school board member is the financial piece of it, and that was one of the reasons we were asked to be here, just to share with you some of the things that go on. And I guess it's balancing the finances with providing an excellent education. And I think we all understand, the way the funding works in the state of Ohio is it's up to the taxpayers and individuals that live in those school districts to determine basically what level of education they want. And it doesn't mean you have to have elaborate fancy buildings, but if you want certain extracurricular activities or you want certain AP classes or those type of things or whatever level of education you want, you determine that by how much you're going to fund the school and what you're going to provide that school district to spend on excellent teachers and the different classes. So the challenge is to provide that and yet balance the budget. And as a board member, that's one of the challenges I know I face. We just went through, I'm sure you've heard some of the things in Buckeye Valley, some of the news that's out there, and some of the things that's on the front page of the different papers isn't the best and most flattering. We've gone through some challenges because we had a deficit ahead of us that we had to balance, and if we didn't address it, we were going to be in red ink in a couple years. So what we did was we opened this year closing one of our 3 elementaries, and that obviously stirred up a lot of controversy. So there's some challenges out there, and you try to do what's absolute best for all the students. I know one of the things I learned real quick, and the reason why I even took on a position as a school board member, like I said, I put 4 students through the school system, and to me there's nothing more important than our students. That's our future. And every decision I know I make as a school board member, I think about the impact of the students. Not so much the impact of the taxpayer, not so much whether it's going to get me reelected, not so much whether it's the favorite decision or what everybody likes, but is it the best thing for all the students? And I just know that if I feel like the decision I made is the best for the students, then we'll make the right decision. So, but we've got some challenges in Buckeye Valley, and we're working through those. And I feel honored to be a member of the school board. Like I said, I'm learning all the time and trying to do the best I can. And I know our entire board is facing some challenges, but that's kind of my take at this point on the school board.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. We'd like to transition over into our question and answer period now. But before we do that, as is our tradition, we'd like to pass the hat and ask that you support the club here, if you would, help us pay for the room so that we can continue to make these kinds of workshops and panels and so forth available. We have a question, though, if I could, for our marketing effort here. How many are here because they saw an ad in the local paper? Okay. How many with something on the radio Saturday morning? How about email from the club? Okay. What other ways?
Facebook.
Facebook? Okay.
I think I got an email either from your club or the Dublin Republican Club, they have something. That's how
All right, terrific. Well, we're delighted to have all of you here. Thank you very much. So with that, Matt, I'd like to turn it back to you.
I'm just controlling the microphone. We'll use that wired mic on the stage.
All right, well, we'll go to question and answers. I'll ask the first question as the moderator. But before I do, I just want to say, what Mark said is largely true. He's wrong that the 90% number is totally irrelevant. But I'll give him that. Right? But what he's right about is, if the one pager you have on the Dublin one, let me give you 3 comparisons to what's Worthington, because I did one of these for Worthington too. The school funding from all taxes, Dublin, it's 82% up over 10 years. In Worthington, it's up 38%. School funding for property taxes in Dublin is up 68%. In Worthington, it's up 22.8%. In total spending, Dublin is up 87.5%. In Worthington, it's up 31%. Now, some of that is because of the 10% decline in kids, but a much different curve. If you could just make sure that teacher pay hadn't jumped 40% and check with inflation, maybe you'd have everything all right. but that's okay, we'll give him that. And that leads into the first question, which is, Mark, tell us about collective bargaining.
All right. Yeah.
Glad you asked.
All right. Glad you asked that question. A couple of things to say about collective bargaining. First and most important, it's not a well-understood process in Ohio. And the campaign that was run last year for or against Senate Bill 5 really didn't help in the common understanding of some of the difficulties that school districts and municipalities might face with collective bargaining. For openers, public sector contracts are not like private sector contracts. You know, if I signed a contract with Paul over there for some of his computer expertise, say the contract is for a year, and after a year he walks away and I walk away, and theoretically we're both happy. In the public sector, that doesn't happen. Contracts continue in full force until either the union is decertified, which hardly ever happens, a successor contract is mutually agreed to, or the parties attempting to negotiate the successor agreement reach something called ultimate impasse, at which point the board can implement its last best offer and the union can strike. Now, of course, the union striking in public education is the nuclear weapon of contract negotiations. But let's ignore, for the moment, the fact that communities generally don't fare well during these kind of strikes. And we'll also ignore the fact that it's against the law in the state of Ohio to reduce the salary of a public school teacher. I bet you didn't know that, right? It's against the law in the state of Ohio. It's Ohio Revised Code 3319.12 to reduce the salary of a public school teacher unless it's part of a universal cut, in which case then you can do it. So what happens during the long economic downturn when the status quo, and such as we've had these last 5 years, where the status quo could be the best that might be achievable by a union? What's their incentive to negotiate if the existing contract, the best they can hope to achieve, is just going to roll over anyway? Well, they lack the incentive to negotiate. That's part of the problem. How is that legal, you ask? Well, again, it goes down to the Ohio Revised Code and a little-known organization in the state called the State Employee Relations Board that governs collective bargaining in the state of Ohio. So they're the arbitrators. So there have been several key cases in the case, and I used the term before, ultimate impasse. You have to get to this ultimate impasse point before a board could unilaterally, if it wanted to do so, impose its terms on the union. So you would think that ultimate impasse would be one of these terms that's well defined. Believe it or not, it's not defined anywhere. Ultimate impasse is what SERB, the State Employee Relations Board, says that it is. So there's a handout, some people got it, called The Giving Tree, and it's from Record Management over at the Ohio School Board Association, Van Keating, that lists a couple of key cases that SERB and some of the courts have decided, and I'll just go through two of them that are mentioned. One was Twinsboro City Schools versus SCRB, where in this case, SCRB, a trial judge, because the school district appealed this, and the 9th District Court of Appeals, because the district didn't go out right away, confirmed that ultimate impasse cannot be reached while there's still a chance that ongoing negotiations are going to be fruitful. So how do you define that? How do you define if ongoing negotiations are going to be fruitful? And the answer, and you know, you can look this up in the SERB decision, it's a fascinating document. The answer is, as long as the board, meaning you, the taxpayer, continue to make some progress towards what the union wants, that's considered to be progress, and so ultimate impasse cannot be reached. The courts agreed, and again, the two courts, trial court and court of appeals, that because taxpayers made no proposal to meet the union at least part way, that was evidence of bad faith bargaining, so the courts ordered the taxpayer, go on the board on behalf of the taxpayer, to go and make some concessions and try again, and on it went. A second case was the matter of Rootstown Local Schools versus SERB, where a district tried to unilaterally impose a step freeze on the teachers. No, get me wrong, I'm not into this unilaterally do this or that to unions, but it goes to the point that this is not as easy a process as just say no. You know, I've heard this question, 100 times in Worthington over the years. Why don't you just say no if the union's demands are, in your opinion, unreasonable? And here are some of the reasons why you can't just say no. In the case of Rootstown...
Mike, stop asking that question, Mike.
In the case of Rootstown, SERB ruled that you have to continue the status quo of an existing contract. Well, what the board tried to do is unilaterally impose a step freeze. Why did they do this? Because they were broke. They just didn't have the money, and they were going to have to cut this and that if the union did make some concessions. So they tried to institute a step freeze, and SERB said no. SERB said that you have to continue the status quo until you reach an agreement with the union. So if you fast forward now, some of the big fights are over healthcare benefits. Why? Because it's the most rapidly increasing percentage of many school districts' budgets. So if the union decides, and most union contracts, if you read them, they're all more or less the same. And most school district contracts have a clause that obligates the district, the taxpayer, to provide health care benefits. Okay? Not an unreasonable proposition. What is unreasonable, I think, is the fact that these health care benefits must be provided in perpetuity regardless of the cost. Remember, contracts don't expire. They roll over forever. So a union, if they wanted to, can continue these health care benefits in perpetuity just by refusing to agree to something else. And this has been backed up by SERB decisions and court decisions.
Anybody else want to add to that at all? Just probably the issue of collective bargaining, not necessarily what Mark said. Not that what you said was a fabulously intelligent.
Could you repeat that?
And can we get the legal sites next time?
Just kind of a short comment there. I guess I take, it might be a Pollyanna viewpoint, but I believe that it's okay to have unions. Maybe it's because of the part of the world I'm from. I'm a little concerned that the teachers' unions have the power to strike. If you consider the services of the school district to be as critical to the community as the firemen and the law enforcement folks who I believe don't have the right to strike, then you could argue that teachers should not have that either. And that means that you have to find another way to resolve negotiations. But the right to strike is I don't like, for the teachers, I don't like that because it puts kids in the crosshairs of an argument between adults. That being said, the process is supposed to be adversarial, and I think the challenge of it. So I'm going to be a one-trick pony in this thing and say, and Mark and I have argued about this incessantly. I believe much of this is a local issue, that you can decide who gets elected to the school boards. The expectation is that when you sit down at a negotiating table that it's an adversarial relationship. It doesn't mean it has to be mean and ugly, although it can get that way. But it should be adversarial if you're trying to reach the best deal for the taxpayers. And I think in too many cases the people are the same sides on both sides of the table. And so it's important that the people in the community pay attention one more time to who's elected to the school board and that they represent the wishes of the community and not the wishes of the union.
Well said. Well said.
There's often this kind of shield put up by the folks inside the school system, which is when they say school funding is really hard to understand, school economics is really hard to understand. It's really not. There's a few, if you understand maybe a handful of key principles, everything else is kind of noise against those key things. And so one of those key principles to understand is how the step and lane pay system works in virtually every school district in Ohio, maybe every school district in Ohio. So this public education effort we all have to do. Is there anything wrong with step and lane? Well, no, it's a negotiated thing. It hasn't been included in the law, but there are no two step and lane pay grids in Ohio that are the same. Every one of them is locally negotiated. And so you can decide what it looks like. You just got to participate in the process. The problem is most people don't know that it exists. And so I think it's important to take that piece of education.
And don't forget, there's a third pay component that could be there as well, which is longevity pay. And I believe in Dublin, administrators get longevity pay in addition to other things. So
yeah.
there's always a third component as well.
Yeah, and there's some other stuff that sneaks in there, like a deferred pay component that comes from sick pay. Where in our district, for example, teachers get 15 sick days a year. They don't use all of them, they get to carry them over. And most when they retire will have 200 or 300 sick days filled out. They're allowed to use a quarter of up to 255 of those, I believe, for payout at their pay the final day they work. And so in our district, many of the teachers that have that maximum amount of sick days walk away with an additional bonus check of $40,000 or so.
Actually,
That's ridiculous.
Mark, is my memory wrong? Haven't you talked about how everyone thinks that when you get to retirements that there's going to be this great windfall the next year, and that the windfall actually doesn't exist because of the payouts and other things, or is there a different mark I'm thinking about?
Yeah. Before I surrender the mic to Mark again, I want to tell you an interesting story in our school district. We're just having this conversation this week, and that's we decided to offer an early retirement incentive to our teachers. Our school district had a lot of teachers with a lot of experience, and it had a pretty easy one-year payback with the plan that we offered. The thing we might not have thought through well enough is that those teachers are making sure that they get all their hips and knees and shoulders and stuff fixed before they go on as TRS as medical coverage. And we're a self-insured school district with medical coverage, and we're taking a real whack this year.
I just want to make a comment on that. We had our superintendent retired last year, and one of the blips in our forecast is paying his severance, which is about $100,000 for his sick leave.
Yeah, I mean, in Dublin's reason retiring at the end of the year, I can only imagine what that's going to be, since I think he makes 3%.
For the next comparison, we ran the food distribution network in the United States the way we ran the schools. The only way you could get food would be to go to your neighborhood commissary. You wouldn't have to pay anything there because all the food would have been bought with the taxes that have been imposed on you. You can only choose from the variety that's on the shelves, and if you wanted anything else, it's too bad because maybe another commissary offers that food, but it's too bad because your zip code, you're not allowed to go there to get food. That's very much the way we run our schools. And by the way, one of the most powerful descriptions of that I've ever heard was on there was quite a while here when the cable systems carried a lot of the educational channels from the universities, and one of those was from Berkeley, which made Courage and say, why would I ever bring up Berkeley in a GOP meeting? And the person being interviewed was Elizabeth Warren, who you may know is running she's running for a Senate seat in Massachusetts. She made a very good point. She started her research, by the way, she's a Harvard Law professor, and she started her research about bankruptcy with the assumption that we have so many bankruptcies in our country because people are gaming the system. They know they can run up the credit card debt to $1 zillion, declare bankruptcy, take a time out for a few years, and play the game again. What she really found out was that, this is a long dialogue, and I won't try to take you down the trail, but it turns out that what her research showed is that the cost of real estate and the cost of running our schools ends up being the price of admission to a good school district. And so this whole notion, this is the reason I'm right with you, is that if you take down these artificial borders that we have that are described school districts, let people go where they are. And the way I go past you is I believe we got to do it the way we do in universities, and that you have to write a tuition check every semester. And again, like with food, if we think about a food distribution network, we don't want anybody to not have food in this country. So most people are expected to buy the food of their choice and pay the price that they find acceptable. For people who don't have enough money, we subsidize them with tax-supported food stamps. So why don't we do something like that with school, where everybody gets to pay for the schools? You write a check out of your pocket to send your kids to schools, and for people that don't have sufficient money to afford that, then they have a subsidized school stamp kind of thing that allows make sure every kid can go to school.
Bill, I'm gonna ask a question if it's okay. Yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I got to follow up with that. I I've been accused of a lot of things, Bob, but central planner is not one of them. and I have to say, it is kind of a surreal experience for me to be the most left person on any given panel. So. but I am going to give the contrarian view here, Bob, because there is one, and you need to hear it. Here's the reason why you can't do that: because the money would just dry up. If you break the connection between your local school district and your property taxpayers, if people no longer perceive that voting for a local levy is going to, and I'm not saying that any of this is true, but it is perceived to be true. If you break that connection between local levy passage and property values, nobody would ever vote for a local levy. And in Ohio, half of the money that you want to give away to parents, talk about your central planning, right? Half the money that you want to give away to parents will dry up. Furthermore, the money that the state donates, which is about 1/3 of the state budget, you're assuming that taxpayers are going to continue to elect a legislature that's going to continue to fund that. If people perceive no benefit, if people think that their money is just going to go to, for example, you, for your private school education, they're just not going to elect a legislature that's going to continue that funding, and the entire system of a free public education system, which I really believe in, as the equalizer in our society. I know it's a colloquialism, but I believe it to be true. The entire system of public education would dry up, and that's why.
Why? How about a hand here for our panel?